Tashtalik, good evening everyone. Welcome to Tibet This Week, a weekly feature in English that provides a preview of this week's news on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Central Tibetan Administration. Today's headlines. Sikyong declares 2017 as a year of campaign for Tibet. President of South Tyrol assures possibility of autonomy for Tibet. Overseas Office of Tibet strengthens Tibet advocacy. United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights expresses concern over cultural and religious rights in Tibet. His Holiness the Dalai Lama graces the first Tibetan Women's Day. On Friday last week, amidst thousands of Tibetans and supporters gathered at the main temple in Dharamshala to mark the 58th anniversary of the Tibetan Uprising Day, the Tibetan political leader Sikyong Dr. Lobsang Sengye declared 2070 as a year of campaign to galvanize the global Tibetan movement to resolve the Tibet issue.
chilo nidong chobge loni peminam zenjul du jorne milu tukju kowe tenso yi tuzik shi yina yabe tuksum zogyur pemin ne de chayul gi yakap kaagi nang kadi jedengi ngobor sungzi shujuyin.
While recalling the sacrifices of the Tibetan men and women, Sikyong sought the world's attention on issues such as Tibet's environment, violations of human rights under the President Xi Jinping. Sikyong called on the Chinese leadership to resume dialogue with the Tibetan representatives and highlighted the recent disturbing development in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, where a week ahead of the commemoration of the Tibetan National Uprising Day, a 500,000-strong army officers with convoy of 1,000 military vehicles reportedly conducted a massive military drill, making it reminiscent of a war zone. The Tibetan political leader, in his statement, condemned the Chinese government's act of imposing travel restrictions on Tibetans in Tibet, preventing them from attending the 34th Kala Chakra teaching by His Holiness the Dalai Lama that took place in January this year, and summoning and interrogating the ones who have already arrived in India for the teaching. The statement read, Tibetans inside Tibet face restriction on their freedom of movement. The President of South Tyrol, an autonomous region in northern Italy, Dr. Arno Compastor, attended the ceremony as the chief guest, with other high-level guests and Tibet supporters such as Senator Michel Raison, Senator André Gattolin, who are the President and Vice President of Tibet Group in the French Senate, former Canadian Senator Consiglio Di Nino, Australian Senator Lisa Singh, President of International Campaign for Tibet Matteo Mukherjee, and Executive Officer of Australia-Tibet Council Paul Brook. While explaining the autonomous administrative structure of his region, the President of South Tyrol, Dr. Arno Compastor, said that it could serve as an example of genuine autonomy to other marginalized communities around the world, including the Tibetan people. The Tibetan political leader and President of South Tyrol held a joint press conference on the second day of the latter's visit to the seat of Central Tibetan Administration, where the Tibetan political leader expressed heartfelt gratitude to South Tyrol for its continued support on the issue of Tibet. In a heartwarming address to Tibetans gathered at the 58th commemoration of the Tibetan National Uprising Day, President Compastor expressed his government's support for Tibet and asserted that Tibet's cause will prevail one day. The President lauded the determination of Tibetans to struggle for their rights and survival as a people. Representative Pemba Tsering, Office of Tibet, Washington, D.C., along with International Campaign for Tibet Board Chairman Richard Gere, President Matteo Mukherjee, visited Capitol Hill on 1st March to organize a new push for Tibet with the new administration and Congress during the year to come. They met with the Senators Bob Corker, Ben Cardin, Marco Rubio, John McCain, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, and Representative Eliot Engel and Jim McGovern, among others. Representative Chumbe Tsering of Office of Tibet London raised the Tibetan national flag in front of Guildhall in Northampton, United Kingdom, along with Deputy Leader of Northampton Borough Council, Councillor Phil Larratt, and Mayor of Northampton, Councillor Christopher Malpass last Tuesday. The Swiss Parliamentarian Group for Tibet has shown a strong support and solidarity with Tibetan people on commemoration of the 58th National Uprising Day in front of the Swiss Parliament House, with more than 24 member parliaments joining photo session with the Tibetan national flag. A prominent German member of the European Parliament and chair of Tibet Interest Group, Mr. Thomas Mann, issued a statement to mark the 58th anniversary of the Tibetan National Uprising Day, supporting the middle way approach to resolve the Tibet issue and calling for more visible support from the European governments. To mark the commemoration of the Tibetan National Uprising Day, a well-known Tibetologist and Buddhologist presented a lecture devoted to 4 centuries of Tibet and Russia ties at the City Library of St. Petersburg in Russia. Local Tibetans and supporters gathered at Debung Komang Center in Moscow to commemorate the day. Honorary representative to Russia, Mongolia and CIS countries, Telo Tugu Rinpoche, in his brief introductory remarks, called on the people to be the wise of the wiseless and support the just cause of Tibet. At the ongoing 34th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Prince Zaid bin Rad Zaid Al Hussein, expressed concern over cultural and religious restriction in Tibet and demonstrated commitment to engage with China for an effective dialogue on important human rights issues. During an hour-long presentation of the annual report, the United Nations High Commissioner said that he is disturbed by the case of restrictions on cultural and religious rights, particularly in Xinjiang and Tibet, and said that he will continue to reach out to China for an effective dialogue on important human rights issues. The Tibetan spiritual leader, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, graced the first official Tibetan Women's Day event organized by the Central Tibetan Administration at the main temple in Dharamshala on 12th March. In his keynote address, His Holiness lauded the Kashak for its consistent efforts in empowering women and further declared that time has come for the Tibetan women who have both the potential and the opportunity to express their leadership prowess to contribute towards global peace and harmony. While expressing sorrow at the prevalence of violence in the name of religion and widespread starvation caused by human greed and insensitivity in parts of the world, caused mainly due to the lack of compassionate leadership in the world, the Tibetan spiritual leader acknowledged women as innately more compassionate and empathetic, and that women in leadership positions could redress these misfortunes. His Holiness further applauded the first batch of Tibetan Buddhist nuns who attained the Geshe-ma degree comparable to a PhD in Buddhist philosophy in December last year. The Tibetan political leader Sikyong Dr. Lobsang Sengye in his address said that 12th March is the day to honor Tibetan women for their courage and sacrifice, and expressed his hope that the Kashaks' consistent efforts as well as the celebration of Tibetan women would pave a way for a brighter future for women and create awareness about women's indispensable role in the community. Speaker of the Tibetan Parliament in Exile, Khenpo Sonam Tempe, in his address paid tribute to the Tibetan women in Tibet who stood against Chinese Communist regime's unlawful occupation of Tibet on 12 March 1959 and said that Tibetan women continue to be at the forefront of the non-violent freedom struggle. French Senator Annick Billon, in her address, expressed her deep faith in Tibetan democracy to work for the equality of women. She also added that the importance of women should be remembered on other days of the year as well and not to be confined to just one day in a year. Calling His Holiness the Dalai Lama the first feminist Dalai Lama, Senator Lisa Singh expressed her admiration for the efforts that His Holiness and the Central Tibetan Administration has undertaken to bring gender parity in Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan community. After unveiling a revised version of the Tibetan Women's Empowerment Policy, subsequently convening the first ever Tibetan Women's Empowerment Conference in February this year, the Kashak designated 12th March every year as Tibetan Women's Day to achieve socio-political empowerment of Tibetan women. 12th March is a significant date as on 12th March 1959, Tibetan women in Tibet stood against Chinese Communist regime's unlawful occupation of Tibet. This marked the first Tibetan Women's Uprising Day, and Tibetan women continue to be at forefront of the non-violent Tibetan freedom struggle. That is all for today. We'll be back with more news next Friday. Have a good weekend.